Oh, this is a quick video to explain how these sort of combined worm towers and wicking planters work. So at the base here, this is very similar to one of my soil feeding stations. However, in this occasion, I've made it it's only about 250 millimeters tall. So I'm trying to keep the overall height of the tower a little bit lower. So this is soil feeding station. You put part composted material in there, or even a mix of fresh kind of green kitchen scraps, and then something that's high in carbon, so cardboard, shredded cardboard, leaves, or you could use something like wood chip or even sawdust if you've got that on hand. But when I suggest sawdust, the kind of coarser shavings you get from things like chainsaws and planers, so it's more like wood shavings rather than the very fine stuff which is made by sort of sanders and things like that. So that's soil feeding station, and then what I've got on top, the next part in the centre, is the wicking container. But obviously, once you've got compost in here, that material will settle down over time. So what I'd suggest is just use some wooden slats or even branches or something like that, just to create some structure. Or if you've got some scrap metal, you could use some aluminium bar or something like that you can pick up, or even copper pipe from a skip. You could use that just to create like a subfloor, so then the next section, the irrigation container, can sit on there. I'd use more timber if I've putting this in situ, but I'm just using this as a demonstration, and that came to hand. So I'd probably do quite a bit more if I was actually making this in the ground, because it's going to be there for a year at least. So the next section is the wicking container. So this is a cut down 25 litre bucket, same as the base soil feeding station, but this hasn't actually got holes drilled in it because this is watertight, so it holds water. And we've got here, this is a filler, because if you imagine this whole thing's going to be buried in the ground. So I cut down, I haven't got it on hand for this one, but it's a 25, not 25, it's 500 milliliter fizzy water bottle, and then I put a solvent weld elbow on there, so that makes a filler. So I should redo a little video just to show that as well. So I've got some fabric on here. This is like a kind of wicking fabric, it's just cotton. And in here, in the wicking bucket itself, I've created a sort of subfloor. So just move this over so you can see a little bit better. And to support this subfloor, this is a piece of reclaimed acrylic that I actually laser cut, but it doesn't have to be quite as elaborate as that. To support this, I've got these 140mm long offcuts of stud timber, and they stand in there. And then in the center here, this is what I call sort of like a wicking sort of cylinder. So this has got egg boxes and a coil of quite hard to see there, that's egg box, and then a coil of cotton towel, and so that makes a really effective wicking container, and that takes moisture right from the bottom. So obviously in here the water level will fluctuate as it's being used up, and then you'll top it up manually through that filler, that cut down water bottle. So just to take a better look, I've showed this in another video, but just to kind of recap, I've got this Coke can or beer can here. That's a 330 milliliter can, and so I've stabbed some little slits in there, so it allows air to exit. So when you fill this up, the air's got somewhere to bubble out from, and then the water will fill up. And there are actually holes in here, so it will gradually drain out from here. And in the previous video I mentioned I've got this capillary matting kind of ears, and they will wick moisture around the surrounding bed as well. So if you imagine this whole thing's buried in the soil. So once again, I've got the subfloor goes on top, and the cotton fits on here. And then what I do is I tend to pull that wicking fabric through the center, and then sort of fan that out, so it's just got somewhere to go, so that will wick onto that fabric. But the next section will be the actual planter itself, and I'll just move this up slightly higher so you can see. And once again, this is a cut down 25 litre HDPE container, and what I've done, I've cut a larger hole in the centre, because that's where the bulk of the wicking is going to be going on. So I wanted to make nice contact with the soil or the compost that's in there, and then I just drilled a number of holes on a kind of a grid, so they're sort of fairly equidistant all around the base of the container. And when you put that on, to get the capillary action to work initially, what I'd suggest is you start to water this from the top, and then that moisture will kind of start to sort of wash that compost into contact with the subfloor. And I haven't shown it on here, but I normally put a layer of biochar over the top of this, which is quite fine particles, and because it's fine, it tends to wick moisture through, and it also holds moisture as well. So that's quite a nice way of actually getting this capillary action to work, and it makes sure that's nice and stable. But obviously with this whole container, the idea is this would be buried in the soil, so you have to dig maybe a 2-foot deep hole, get that set up, or set it in a foot deep, and then have a raised bed, and then you've got that wicking into the surrounding soil as well. So with these little capillary sort of tubes, this wicking tubes, all I use is some kind of natural fibre, so something like cotton, and this is just a cotton t-shirt, and then I use corrugated cardboard, and I use ideally with the corrugations sort of vertically, and then it's just a case of, it's going to be quite hard to see, so I'll maybe move back a fraction. So just lay the cotton over onto the cardboard, make sure it's wider than the card, so it's sort of level with the base, and then it sort of fans out over the edge, and then it's just a case of rolling that round into the sort of cylinder. It doesn't have to be that tight or anything like that, but ideally if you can kind of wedge as much fabric down into that cut down PET bottle, then you'll get a really nice sort of capillary action working. And with these things, what is quite nice with the capillary container, with those extra ears that stick out into the surrounding soil, there'll be quite a reasonable throughput in terms of the moisture it actually wicks. So that container will be you'll be topping it up every week, so that the irrigation that's in there isn't going to get a chance to sit around and go kind of anaerobic. And obviously you can regulate how much water you're actually adding as well. So if it's very, very hot, you might want to fill it right up to the top. If it's cooler and then plants aren't going to be using up as much water, you're not going to get as much evaporation, so you might want to cut that down. So you can see it looks like a kind of disappointing Swiss roll. The cream is just the cream and jam is just cotton in this case, and then I don't know, the cake part will just be the cardboard wrapped around the edge. So when it gets to about the size, maybe 2 inches diameter, 50mm, something like that, you might want to check it with one of those cut down bottles, and that's a good fit. So what I'll do now is I'll just get a pair of scissors and I'll just cut that section off. And then with the bottle, I cut the ends off on a bandsaw, or you could use a Stanley knife. Just be careful, because obviously it's going to be sharp. But one end is slightly wider, I think it's where the base is. So if you could use that through, got a slight sort of taper. I might have made this too big. So I'll just see, you may fit, yeah, I'll just have to cut a little bit more off. It's not critical, but I think it's quite nice if it all wedges together quite tightly. It's quite hard to do that with a camera in front of me as well. There you go. So that pushes over there, and then this one's a little bit shorter, but what I do is I tend to fan that cotton out so it's got something to contact with the cotton that's on the subfloor. So that's like a little wicking cylinder, and because I'm using the tops of the bottles, the bottle caps and the screw thread as aeration fittings in fermenting bins, I was trying to find a use for that centre section of the PET bottle. And these are half-litre bottles, and what I do is I tend to cut it maybe 5 or 6mm either side of that ridge, where there's a kind of, it stands out a little bit where the label fits on that flat section in the centre. So that's a little wicking cylinder. I haven't got a name for this. It's kind of like a I don't know, soil feeding station combined wicking bed, which isn't particularly catchy. But the other thing I'd suggest, if you can find these black HDPE containers, they contain carbon black, which makes them much more resistant to ultraviolet. These ones, I think there's a date on it on the end. What's this one? This is 13, so 2013, and it's really flexible. It's not deplasticizing at all. And these were just stored outside at the back of a car wash. I think it was alloy wheel cleaner in there, which is a kind of water soluble solvent. Well, not solvent, like a detergent. But these detergents and things, they have to go wash down the drains, so they have to use kind of biodegradable detergents now. And 2 holes in the sides. What I've found, if you want to kind of access this for maintenance, it makes it much easier to lift. If you imagine there's soil in here, it just makes it much easier to lift that. And I haven't shown it on that one, but there's holes in the sides of this as well, so you can lift those separate parts up. I've also made the larger hole in there, so you might want to harvest that after a while. But the idea with these is it's got a nice big depth, so if you've got a big container, and I've got something like, I think it's an old cold water storage tank from a loft, and it's had holes drilled in the base, and it's massive, so if you just put compost in there, it'll kind of settle down and compact at the bottom, and you're using loads and loads of compost, and it's not going to be particularly good. It's going to take a lot of watering, it's going to all wash down, and yeah, it's just going to be a bit of a nightmare really. So what I thought I'd do is maybe 2 or 3 of these in the container, which immediately probably fills up about a third of the volume. The base of this I put lots of probably similar to what's in here, but maybe larger logs and things like that to make it more of a hugelkultur bed, so that'll bring it up about a foot. And then just surrounding this, then I'd use really sort of heavy compost or horse manure or something like that, and then just top off with compost. And the compost doesn't have to go right to the top of that container. I think if you can, or if you've got enough material on hand, it looks nicer if it does, and then you can continue the planting right over this whole container. You might want to put slightly different plants in here. There might be slightly more moisture in terms of the sort of soil in the centre of the wicking container itself, but these things here, they'll radiate out moisture around maybe a foot all around. It just helps to maintain the plants in between manually watering. So there you go. So it's a combination of different sort of techniques really. I'm using the HDPE containers because they're readily available. They're quite a nice size, they're quite manageable. You can get one large plant like a big squash or something in there, or you could use, I don't know, even cut these down even shallower, and then you could do really kind of lettuces and things like that. And obviously the height of this, the moisture in there will wick around about a foot, so if you make that higher, then the top surface of the soil isn't going to be so moist. So what happens there is you tend to get a kind of crust of fairly dry compost, which stops the evaporation. This overall height is about 350, so when that water level's quite low, it's not going to be wicking right to the surface, but obviously when that's topped up, it's going to keep that soil moist as well. But I'm using these primarily to, especially this year when it's quite cold and you're trying to sort of harden things off, and then there's a bit of flexibility between taking them out, putting them in situ. Maybe if there's a frost or a late frost, you can take the container out and put it into the greenhouse or the polytunnel. But there you go. What I've done here as well, this is obviously to keep a nice flat bottom on there, that is the base of the container. And then looking down here, then that's actually the top of the container there, so it's hard to see, but so you've got the screw top and the handle on there, so that would be the full-size container. So it uses up every bit of material really, which is quite a nice use. That larger hole, there's no problems. The worms are going to go through those holes into the surrounding compost, so you don't need to keep the cap on it, and you can use the cap for like an aeration fitting as well. But then, yeah, so that's the container. I suggest using these pieces of wood because they will tend to sort of, under the weight, they'll slide down into each other, and it might even stretch out that container a bit. So it's quite good just to have those slats on there. and then that supports the weight of that planter when it's on there. So okay, so it's a reasonably long video, so thanks for watching if you still are, and I'll speak to you soon.